Hello, this is Joe Polish, president of Piranha Marketing and founder of the Genius Network interview series, and you're about to hear one of my Genius Network interviews, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this, and I hope you find it very useful. If you want to find out more information about some of the interviews and resources that can help you in your business, you can go to www.joepolish.com. And we have a Joe Polish Recommends section with all kinds of resources and vendors and services and products that we recommend that can help you in your business. And also for more useful interviews and a whole list of other people that I've interviewed, you can go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks and enjoy the interview. Hello friends and clients, this is Joe Polish, president of Piranha Marketing and founder of the Genius Network interview series. And today I'm going to be doing an interview unlike any that I've ever done before. This is with a guy by the name of Steven Pressfield, who I just recently met in person today for the first time. However, the way that I came about knowing Steven was I read a book that he wrote called The War of Art. Not the art of war, but the War of Art. And it was, honest to God, one of the most amazing books that I have ever read. Certainly one of the best books that I've read in many years. I liked it so much that I immediately went out and bought over 100 copies for my top clients. I've given away many copies to friends and family. I think it's absolutely a fabulous book that everybody should read. We're going to talk about really the content of The War of Art. However, Steven has written some really huge books and some that have even had movies made out of them. For instance, The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was recently turned into a movie. Gates of Fire, Tides of War, The Virtues of War, which is about Alexander the Great. And let me just read a little bit of Steven's profile here in his bio so that I make sure I don't leave anything out. So this is just some background information for all of our listeners. And Steve, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me.
And what I'm going to do to give the listeners a little bit of background about who you are, Steven, is just read a bio that's actually located on your website, which is stevenpressfield.com. Steven Pressfield was born in September 1943 in Port of Spain, Trinidad. He graduated from Duke University in 1965, joined the Marine Corps where he was a 0311 rifleman in the reserves till 1971, got married and went to work in New York City as a $150 a week copywriter for Benton and Bowles. One day, while rewriting the Just Add Water text for the back label of Gravy Train dog food, Mr. Pressfield asked himself, shouldn't I be doing something a little more worthwhile? He decided to quit and write a novel. I don't know if he should have been doing something more worthwhile. That's an important project there, Steven. Big mistake. Within 3 years, Steven Pressfield was divorced, broke, and living in a van down by the river. He drove cabs and tended bar in New York, taught school in New Orleans, drove tractor trailers in North Carolina and California, worked on oil rigs in Louisiana, picked fruit in Washington State, and in general, worked all the jobs that writers work when they're running away from writing. Somewhere in here, he completed 3 novels, none of which saw the light of publication. When the last one crashed and burned in New York in 1980, Steven was faced with a choice between hanging himself and bolting for Tinseltown. The coin came up heads, so, as Newman once said of Kramer on Seinfeld, he packed a grip and split for the coast. Over the next 15 years, Mr. Pressfield wrote or co-wrote 34 screenplays, several of which got made into extremely forgettable movies. Steven refuses to name them, but maybe I can pull those out of you if you want. He did, however, finally succeed in turning pro as a writer and actually paying the rent. He detailed these experiences in 2002 in his amazing book, The War of Art. I just added amazing because it truly is an amazing book. During various bouts of despair over the years, Steven Pressfield has discovered solace in Gandhi's favorite book, the Bhagavad Gita. Hopefully I pronounced that right. In 1995, the idea came to him to rip it off. The result was a novel, The Legend of Bagger Vance, which became a couple years later another powerfully sleep-inducing cinematic experience. Fortunately, the book did better, even sneaking onto a couple of bestseller lists, and Steven Pressfield decided to go legit. My personal opinion, I saw the movie, I thought it was a fantastic movie, and certainly the book is much better. 3 historical novels set in ancient Greece are his books Gate of Fire, Tides of War, and Last of the Amazons followed. The books have enjoyed respectable success in the States, but have become monsters in their native land. At the close of 2003, the first 3 were number 1, number 5, and number 8 on the Greek bestsellers list. As of December 2004, the fourth book, The Virtues of War, a novel of Alexander the Great, is #1. Gates of Fire has been included in the curriculum of the U.S. Military Academy and the U.S. Naval Academy and is on the Commandant's reading list for the Marine Corps. In September 2003, the city of Sparta made Mr. Pressfield an honorary citizen. Like all writers, Mr. Pressfield doesn't know where his next idea is coming from and firmly believes that he will never work again. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming down to Tempe, Arizona on your way to a trip to Santa Fe. And I know you're probably going to have a great time up there. And we recently touched base, and I contacted you, told you I loved your book, thought it was amazing, and asked you if you'd be open to doing an interview, and you graciously agreed. And it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, it's a pleasure to meet you, Joe. Like you said, we just met today. We've been hanging out for a couple hours, and now here we are in the studio ready to do this, and let's go for it.
Yeah, it's been fun, actually. We've had some very interesting discussions, and I'm really looking forward to this. And before I get into the questions and stuff, I do have a few questions I do want to ask you. I would recommend to all the listeners, if they have not already, to definitely read The War of Art. And, I've not read all of your books, and everyone that I have spoken with that has read any of your books has nothing but glowing things to say. And from The War of Art, which is the only nonfiction book that you've written up to this point, I think is absolutely amazing. So, I love The War of Art, and the reason I love it is because it's the best written explanation of self-sabotage and the ways to overcome self-sabotage behaviors that I've ever read. So I want to start off by asking you what inspired you to step away from your historical novels and write this type of book.
Well, what the book is really, it's about writing, Joe. It's about, as you know, it's about, but not about the craft of writing in the sense of, beginning, middle, and end of a story or anything like that. It's about the ways that we stop ourselves from writing. And like in one of the early chapters in the book, which is only 2 sentences long or 3 sentences long, it says there's a secret that real writers know that wannabe writers don't know. And the secret is this: it's not the writing that's hard, it's the sitting down to write. And that's really what the book is about sitting down to write. And the reason I wrote it, just because, like, over the years, as a working writer, a lot of my friends and people that I know say, well, I've got a book in me, or I've got a screenplay in me, and da-da-da-da. And I've sat up more nights than I wish to remember, till 2 a.m., kind of psyching up my friends, and telling them, do this, do that, you've got it in you, that kind of thing. And, of course, nobody ever listens to me, But finally, I had just sort of, the material that's in this book, I had verbalized, probably 30 times. And I had about a 2-month gap while another book was being edited. And I thought, I'm just going to put this down. Whether anybody's interested in this or not, I don't know. But I'm going to put it down on paper. And then I can at least just hand it to somebody and say, I don't have to sit up till 2 o'clock in the morning with you. So here it is. Here's kind of my experiences from the trenches, from a writer it took me 17 years of writing before I got my first $1, and another 10 years after that before my first book was actually published. So this is the hardcore school of hard knocks stuff that I experienced in that time, and I wish somebody had given me this book at the start. It would have saved me a divorce. It would have saved me a lot of agony. So that's why I finally put it onto paper.
Interesting. Well, I mean, to have written all that time that you did with really no financial rewards, with what was the drive? What was the light at the end of the tunnel that just kept you going?
That's a very good question, John. I used to work in advertising. I worked in, what I would do is I always wanted to write novels, and I would save my money and then quit and go someplace cheap, write a novel, nobody would buy it, I'd go crawling back to advertising and repeat. I did that 3 different times. And but what the experience was is I would come home from a day working, I used to work in big ad agencies in New York, and I loved the people. Some of my real good friends are still the people I knew in those days, and I'd come home having done maybe some pretty good work during the day, and I was still just completely depressed. I would just come home from the day ready to blow my brains out. And the only way that I could kind of recover sanity was to try to do some real writing at night, an hour or 2 hours like that. So in other words, I didn't have any choice. It wasn't about a dream of being a writer or anything like that. I was just so depressed doing anything else. This was like the only thing I found that made me feel okay with myself. You know, I used to finish writing one of the novels that I would do that nobody ever bought, and I'd show it to my friends, right? Everybody else here, you know, and they'd get that plastic smile on their face, you know, and they'd tell me, you know, oh, it's really interesting, Steve. You know, it's like, so, you know, so there was no positive feedback from it. It was just murder. But I just had no other choice. And I think that's probably true for a lot of creative people, a lot of writers and artists and entrepreneurs, I suppose, too. It's like they just can't stand doing the other stuff until finally they just have to face the music and go for it.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, because there's been many times in my entrepreneurial career where I certainly could have went and got a job that was, from a pay standpoint, bringing in far more money at a lot less effort than trying to go through the rigmarole of figuring out how to run a business and stuff, and I just stayed with it because there was something internal that was like, this is what you should be doing. You've had a ton of different jobs growing up, and you've lived in all kinds of different places as an adult, and I mean, were you real adventurous as a kid? Did you move around a lot? What was your life experience in the beginning that turned you into who you are today?
No, really, I had like a Leave It to Beaver type of childhood. I even grew up in Pleasantville, New York.
Wow.
How bad is that?
Wow.
But the various jobs and stuff that I did, you know, that you kind of read off before, it was all about running away from writing. You know, I sort of went through, I mean, I believe that you will always stall until the bitter end. The thing that you really have to do, you'll do every substitute and every surrogate that's easier along the way. And so I just tried, you know, any number of other sort of things, hoping that maybe this will work for me. You know, if I could do this, maybe that'll work for me. But it was just a series of just running until I couldn't run anymore.
In the book, you refer to that force as resistance. And, I mean, this, in a lot of ways, is like a self-help book, although I think calling The War of Art a self-help book is really an injustice to it, because this is so, from my opinion, and this is purely my opinion, this is so much more than a self-help book. This is a very profound insight into the self-sabotage and the demons that literally we fight, which is ourselves, our own internal battles. And, I mean, why does that force exist, where people will take the path of least resistance and do everything to avoid doing their work? Why do you think that is?
Well, first let me see if I can describe what resistance is, what I call resistance with kind of a capital R. To me, I sort of experience resistance as a negative force, like a force that will repel me from work that I know I need to do, the next book that I need to do, or whatever. And I think that, let me just talk about just writers as their experience. And it's the force that keeps you away from facing that blank page on a certain day. And the unconscious, or whatever it is, will throw up all kinds of rationalizations and self-justifications and that will keep you from doing that. Well, today I'd rather sharpen my pencil. Today I'd rather do this. I'd rather do that. And in the book, in The War of Art, I kind of list all the various forms of self-sabotage that I've experienced myself or seen. And chasing money is a thing, drugs, any kind of a thing that will give you a kind of a cheap, easy, quick, instant gratification high. And of course, they're all hollow. And as soon as you've done them, you get that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach because you haven't done whatever it is that you know you need to do. In the case of a writer, you know, it's sitting down and facing the blank page.
That's profound.
Absolutely. In fact, you know, I've been doing this now for, I don't know, I don't even want to count the years. And it never goes away. It never gets any less. It's like the warrior that has to fight the battle every morning. You have to kind of slay the dragon every morning. But I think that one of the best feedback things that people have said to me who've read the book is that just acknowledging that there is this thing called resistance is kind of a liberating thing. Now, you can think of it as the devil. You can think of it as a negative force from inside your own soul. And I can go into that in greater detail if we want to later on, my own theory on what it's all about. But it really helps. And it really helped me. Because it took me maybe, I don't know, 7 or 8 years before I sort of finally grokked the fact that there was this thing called resistance. And because prior to that, I sort of bought into all the lies that resistance was telling me. You know, that they would say, well, you know, you shouldn't be writing today, you should be doing this. And I'd buy that, you know. But when I finally realized that there was this sort of entity, either inside me or outside me, wherever it was, that was kind of like the shark in Jaws, was like the alien, you know, it was like the predator. It was this thing that wouldn't quit. Then that was kind of liberating for me because I felt at least I know there's this thing out there, and now I can focus my energy on attacking it. So that a typical day for me of writing, I never worry about how much I've written. I never worry about how good it is. The only thing I tell myself is beat resistance just today. Sit down and work until you're tired. I don't care if it's good. I don't care if it's mediocre. Just keep doing it and do it today and do it tomorrow and do it the next day after that. And that has really been sort of a real Polaris, North Star guiding beacon for me. That's my one law. It's never failed. Just do it every day and then do it the next day.
Now at this point in your career, having gone many years without getting paid a penny, and now, you know, having major motion pictures created out of your works, and literally just the fact that you're, you know, now a massively endorsed, well-known writer, and I mean, until just a month ago, I didn't even know who you were, and I hate saying that on the interview.
Very few people know who I am.
It's just the truth. Now, I want to have the listener have the right context about, I mean, what's the difference between just the resistance that is out there versus flowing? I mean, do you ever get to a stage in life, do you believe? Is it after conquering resistance where life just becomes easy, or is it never that way?
Not in my experience. You know, to me, it's sort of like diving into a cold pool each morning. Once you're in the pool, once you're into it and you're doing it, then flow happens. You know, it's just kind of a magical process in a way. But the hard part is jumping into the pool the first time. It's like, there's an analogy also that I use in the book that I think is kind of true. It's kind of like going hunting in the morning. If you picture us back in our days as hunter-gatherers and stuff like that, where you'd start out, you'd get up before dawn, it's cold, you don't want to get out of the cave, you're in a nice warm cave, your wife is beside you, you got a little fur over you, but you get out there with your buddies, the grass is wet, it's cold, you know, you're struggling up through these brambles and these bushes, and you're saying to yourself, why am I doing this? What is this all about? And you just keep slogging and slogging. The only thing you really need to know is just keep going, keep going. Sure enough, after about an hour or so, for half an hour or something, you start to get into the rhythm, your blood starts to warm up a little bit, and then sure enough, you come around a corner and there's that little rabbit or that deer or whatever it is that you need to bring back to feed the kids will suddenly appear. You will get into the flow. But in my experience, every morning it's difficult. Every morning I have to psych myself up. In fact, I start psyching myself up the night before. And that's how I experience it. And what sort of split the diamond for me was the concept of turning pro. I think that when people tell me, oh, you know, I've been working on a symphony, or I've been working on a book, or I have an album, you know, and I just haven't been able to get to it. I've had something with the kids, or I've had this and that and the other thing. I never say anything because I never want to be negative to anybody, but a part of me is thinking, you know, you can't think that way. That's kind of amateur type of thinking. If you're really committed, if you really want to, even if it's only an hour a day, you do it. And you don't let these other things throw you off the track.
You know, my friend Denny Hatch, who's a former editor for Target Marketing Magazine, has written several books. He had, I don't know if this originally came from Denny or someone else, but I saw him at a seminar have this overhead, which I've actually used, which is amateurs wait for inspiration, professionals do it with a headache. And I think in the real world, I mean, my experience also, the question I ask you, I don't feel like I wake up every day and life is easy. I mean, for the things that have ever been worthwhile for me, I've had to work my butt off in order to get them, and more so than that. I mean, some of the biggest forms of adversity in my life has also produced the highest levels of growth and wisdom and advancement for me also. And I have a friend, Dave Kekich, who's been in a wheelchair for over 20 years, and one of his credos is, life is hard if you live it the easy way, and easy if you live it the hard way. And my take on that is living life the hard way does make life ultimately better and easier in the long run. And again, what I take out of that is just doing the things that you need to do. I mean, I've never been at a point where, man, I just love exercising. You know, exercising to me is kind of a drag, but I do it every day because I like the benefits of exercise and I like the results of it, and I don't want to experience the repercussions of not taking the time out to do it, because I have a belief about health that if you don't take the time out for it now, you're going to take time out for it later in life. And I think so much of what I related to in your book is the way you wrote about it with creativity and overcoming barriers applies to that on all levels. If you just take the path of least resistance and you don't really put all of yourself into it, that's exactly what you're going to get, which is a mediocre existence with a lot of disappointments and not really doing much of anything.
Well, let me bring this into a focus here, if I can, Joe, because I think someone listening might be a little misled in that we're just sort of saying you got to do what's hard rather than what's easy. And that's not what I'm talking about in the war of art. What I think is that I'm a believer that I believe in previous lives, but even if you don't believe in that, I certainly believe that we each have a destiny. That when we come into this world, we each have one specific God-given talent. Now, it may be something creative in the arts, or it may be something like helping other people. It may be being a counselor. It may be being just being a mom, or any sort of a calling, anything that's above and beyond a job. And that we all have that thing that's sort of programmed into us from the start. And where resistance comes in is in doing that one thing that we were born to do. And when we start to focus on that one thing, and we start to, like if we were a born writer, when we start to sit down at the blank page, that's when resistance comes up. Resistance won't come up if we're going swimming or if we're going to work as a banker or something like that. It's only in that one specific calling that our soul is calling us to. And in fact, it's sort of axiomatic to me that the more important an activity is to the evolution of our souls, the more resistance we'll feel to it. So that in a way, you can even use resistance as a kind of an ally. You can use resistance as a sort of a compass needle, because the more resistance you feel, the more you can be sure that that's the thing you have to do. Whatever it is that you really, really, really feel that negative, that repellent force coming from. For me, it was writing just because I'm a born writer. And that, it might have been different. In fact, let me ask you, Joe. I mean, you're a born entrepreneur. You're a born motivator of people. Did you, when you first started, did you feel resistance to doing that sort of thing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do a lot of public speaking these days. And I remember my very first seminar that I ever had to do, which was in 1994 in San Diego. And I wrote a sales letter to sell a full-day seminar. And I had 50 people pay to come and attend this particular seminar. It was 8 hours. No other guest speakers, me. I was terrified of public speaking. I hated it. I did not want to be up there, and the entire time I was up there, I was, some people say when you kind of get into it, then the nervousness subsides and then you're into the flow. I mean, the entire day I was a nervous wreck. Now, in spite of that, I still did extraordinarily well. Ended up selling many thousands of dollars worth of my marketing courses that I was at that particular event doing. But I didn't want to do it, but there was something inside of me saying, I need to overcome this. And my second speech was a little bit easier, but it was still extraordinarily difficult. And my third seminar was extraordinarily difficult also. But it eventually got to the point where now I can be up in front of several thousand people, and I'd be able to pull it off. Initially, there's of course the nervousness and stuff, and I always see any calling as resistance. But absolutely there was something inside of me that said, you got to face this. I mean, I've had a belief that which you fear and don't face controls you, and that which you fear and you face, you will one day eventually control it. And that's kind of how I look at resistance. So can I ask you about fear? I mean, is it fear?
I think that resistance definitely takes the form of fear, and we experience it as fear. And so a lot of what it takes to overcome resistance is, in my experience, is overcoming of fear. And how people will, like professional athletes that suddenly find themselves with millions of dollars, or singers or movie stars that suddenly kind of rocket to success, how they'll act out and destroy themselves, self-sabotage, right, because they just get beyond their comfort zone. And we're all it's so easy to get stuck in a comfort zone, and that's, you just start to die when you're there, and it takes a lot of courage to be the crab that crawls out of the bucket, and gets to the other side.
Right.
Resistance is experienced as fear, I think.
And I mean, this is the crab that crawls out of the bucket. Can you, I know what you're talking about, the other crabs pulling them down. Can you elaborate on that? Because I think it is such a great analogy for life. I mean, where does that saying come from?
Well, there's another thing. I don't know about that. But one of the forms that resistance will take, it's kind of interesting, is like the entire families or groups of friends will be in a kind of a secret conspiracy that they'll all kind of remain at a mediocre level. And then if one of them sort of dares to try to live out their dream, a dancer that starts to dance or a playwright that starts to write a play, the other people will try to drag that person back, just like crabs will try to pull that one crab back into the soup. And the reason they do that is not that they're evil or anything, it's that they're dealing with their own resistance, but it's unconscious. And when they see someone of their group or their family overcoming their resistance, then they say to themselves, well, it's a reproach to them, why can't I overcome mine? And so what will happen is if you suddenly start living out what you know you're supposed to live out, your friends will say to you, Joe, you're different, man. I don't know what it is. You've changed, And we know, how many people do we know that are stoners and, that get loaded every night or go through a case of beer every night, and they're all sort of in this stew together, and there's a complicit thing there of we all agree we're never going to rise above mediocrity, and we all stay there. And that's just a form of slow suicide.
Yeah, absolutely. And so do you think it's a rare individual that breaks out of that pack? Is there?
Yes, I do think it is.
As you would call it, turning pro.
Yeah.
What are the factors is this a learned behavior? Is it something internal that causes someone to turn pro? Is it a choice?
I think that in a way, I'm sure that you, Joe, were just driven to do what you had to do. You're driven by some compulsion. I think probably most entrepreneurs are, right? They just can't stand working for a living and knowing that their blood and sweat is making money for somebody else and not for them, or that they have a great idea, they're constantly producing great ideas, but the boss won't let them implement them, And if the boss does, he always steps on it and changes it and puts his footprints all over. And they want to get out there and show what they can do. And so I think, in a way, those people who do overcome resistance and do succeed in turning pro are kind of driven to do it. It's like me. I just tried everything else to avoid it, but in the end, it was even more painful to avoid it than to actually face it. So that's my answer to that.
Well, what you just said, Stephen, I think is extraordinarily interesting because for our listeners, I believe that everyone that's even listening to an interview like this already has the potential, the ability to, if they're not already, be a pro. The mere willingness and desire to even take time in their lives to listen to something like this, to pick up your book and read it, to involve themselves in some sort of betterment and improvement, which is the majority of my listeners, has them stand apart than the average person out there.
I'm sure that's true, yeah.
The United States where we live, less than 3% of the American population even own a library card. Most people don't read books, And, you know, you're a writer. And certainly there's no writers that I know that are successful writers that don't read books. I mean, you know, the mere art of reading and writing is in many cases more advanced than what a lot of people do with their time. So the reason that I bring this stuff up is for the benefit of everyone listening. If there's any contribution that I can make to my listeners, and why I'm interviewing someone like you is I feel that your book is enormously beneficial, very profound, very beneficial to me. I mean, this is a book that I can't imagine not reading many, many times. This book is so good that I will probably read it every year, just to continually remind myself with it. So I want all of the people listening out there to be able to walk away from this interview not only with some insights that will give them some direction in their lives, but also you know, help them come to a better understanding of how to identify those things that really are calling to them to do something more. Because if we can help my listeners become better, then they can help the world to become better. Because everything about your book is not how to go out and manipulate people for money or how to, you know, it's always about a higher calling. It's not how to, you know, do some vagrant thing that's out there. So now that we've discussed resistance and have given the listener an idea of what it is, how do we overcome it?
Okay, and I'll just tell you what worked for me. And I'm sure that there are many other ways. I'll tell you a little story that's in the War of Art. Someone once asked Somerset Maugham, the great writer, if he wrote on a schedule or only when inspiration struck him. And he said, I write only when inspiration strikes me. He says, fortunately, it strikes me every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Now, what Somerset Maugham was saying was that he was a pro. And what is a pro? Let's talk about this. Because in other words, what worked for me was what I call turning pro. And it doesn't mean you have to literally turn pro, but it's a change in attitude. And I can definitely say that I can divide my life in neat little halves before I turned pro mentally and after I turned pro mentally. Before I turned pro, everything was chaotic, just all over the place. After I turned pro mentally, everything was focused and in a solid, strong line. Now, what does it mean to turn pro? What's the difference between a pro and an amateur? An amateur does something, an amateur is a weekend warrior. An amateur does something for fun. An amateur does something as an avocation. A pro does something as a vocation. An amateur does it for fun. A pro does it for money. To me, the ultimate pro is Tiger Woods. He's kind of my image of a pro, or Michael Jordan would be another one. But the attitude of a pro, we're all already pros in a way, you know, if we have a job. And so we can take some of the principles from that and apply it to overcoming resistance and living out whatever our dream is. And what does a pro do? A pro shows up for work every day. Right? In our job, we just have to show up every day. A pro stays on the job all day long. He doesn't just go there for an hour. He really goes for it. A pro is in it for real. It's not just for fun. He's got to pay the rent. He's got to support his kids, that kind of thing. A pro takes it seriously, but not that seriously. He knows a pro doesn't identify himself with his job. A pro does his job. And a pro has a kind of a great, to me, a professional has a real kind of lunch pail, hard hat attitude towards things. Because one of the things, Joe, I think that screws up people who try to write novels or plays and fail to do it, I think a lot of times they take it too seriously. They're too passionately committed to it. Their identity is tied up with it so much that they freeze, they choke. It's just too much weight on it, you know. Whereas a pro has a kind of more of a cold-blooded attitude towards something. A pro is going in there to do a job. If you're a professional bull rider in a rodeo, you know you got to get there, and you got to get ready to do it. Put on your bulletproof vest, get out there and do it. But you're not overly crazily committed to it in the sense that your identity is. You're a hard-boiled, cold-blooded guy that goes in like Paladin, have gun, will travel. You're a gun for hire. You know how to do it. Now, what I'm saying is not that you take a sort of a distant attitude toward it, but you sort of separate yourself in a positive, professional way from it. There's a thing in the book where I talk about when I first went out to Hollywood and started working as a screenwriter. I learned that other writers had their own corporations. They were just one-man corporations. It was like, and they did their writing not as themselves, but as a loan out from their corporations. And I thought that was really great because it separated themselves as the boss of themselves from themselves as doing the work. So you sort of had two parts. There was yourself and yourself incorporated. And so when yourself, the worker, starts bitching and moaning and complaining and saying, I can't sit down and do this today, yourself, the boss, the pro, can say, get down there, sit down there, go to the gym, do whatever it is you have to do. And I like that sort of dividing yourself in half. One guy is in charge of you, and the other guy is doing the work.
That is a very interesting way of looking at it. So what you're saying is, take your work as important, but don't take it so seriously, because if you're holding on so tight, you're liable to just break it.
It's a sort of a tricky semantic thing, because by no means am I saying don't take the work seriously. Obviously, the pro takes it tremendously seriously, or he wouldn't or she wouldn't devote her entire life to it. And of course, just like entrepreneurs, a lot of times give up a tremendous amount to be able to follow their dream. Same thing with artists, a lot of times they give up, a happy family life. Who knows what they give up? Everybody has to make a sacrifice for this thing, and that's why a lot of people don't do it. But, so I'm not saying, by no means am I saying don't take it seriously, but what I am saying is take a professional attitude, like a professional basketball player that shows up every night, even if he's sick. The professional athlete knows that he always has to play hurt. You never get to a game where all the pieces are functioning, right? There's always something in the knee, something you have to play hurt, you have to go through it. So I'm not saying don't care, but what I'm saying is be one remove back. It's like Madonna, I think, is a great example of a pro. You see her in these pointy, these little cone brassieres and these bustiers and stuff like that, and you know that Madonna is a very well educated, very thoughtful, very intelligent businesswoman. So she separates the Madonna that's doing her thing on the videos from the Madonna that's kind of building an empire behind the scenes. And she knows that she is not that person out there on the video, or a part of her may be, but and that's how she's able to do it so well, because she's not she has perspective on what she's doing. And that's what a pro has that an amateur doesn't have.
Right. Well, and I think what I've gotten out of what you're saying, and certainly you go into great depth about everything that we're discussing in just a brief period of time in the War of Art, is just failure. It's not being really afraid to fail. Not that you won't have fear. It's just that you're willing to go out there and put your butt on the line. And if you get, your head shoved into the dirt, an amateur might just, run away and call it quits and never try to attempt anything again. Whereas as the makings of the pro is you just get up and you go for it. I mean, certainly someone, I don't believe, becomes a pro just by, hitting it right out of the park the first time and all of a sudden they've just graduated in a pro. I mean, it comes from, in many cases, just diligence, discipline, hard work, and adversity and overcoming obstacles.
You really hit the nail on the head there. And one thing, Joe, at the very start where you said about fear of failure and stuff, and I think that there was the great Spartan king Leonidas, who was in charge of the famous 300 Spartans at the Battle of Thermopylae. Somebody once asked him what was the supreme warrior virtue from which all other virtues flowed, and he replied, contempt for death, which I think is great. Now, for us, for artists, in my opinion, it's contempt for failure. That's what I think the supreme virtue is. So we have to not be afraid to fail. Always remember that we can fail one time, but that's not our whole. We haven't shot our whole wad. We've got another one and another one coming after that. They used to say of Cole Porter when he would write a song when he was working in the movies and it would be rejected, and he didn't take it hard at all. He said, "I got a million more of them," and he'd just go back and do it again. And let me read a couple of things here that are sort of the attributes of a professional to see if I can, because I feel like I haven't really quite articulated as well as I wanted to. One of the things about a professional is patient. The amateur, when an amateur will start out on a project like, say, writing a book or a dissertation, a PhD dissertation, and they're impatient. They think, or if you can't train for the marathon in 2 weeks, you can't become a bodybuilder and look like Arnold Schwarzenegger in the first day at the gym. A professional knows that it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so a professional girds himself or herself for the long run and stays in there and hangs in there and is patient. A professional seeks order. When I was living, in my van down by the river, I lived this completely chaotic existence. And you just can't do that. As a professional, I was just listening to one of your tapes today, Joe. Somebody was saying the same thing about you have to seek order and seek discipline more and more, because chaos reinforces resistance. And everything has to be about overcoming resistance. A professional demystifies things. And a real professional talks about craft and about the technique. I'm just reading a book now, Bob Dylan's book, Chronicles. And he's talking about various ways of playing the guitar and all kinds of technical things, different ways he would sing, different ways that he could get at, that he's not talking about art and artsy-fartsy stuff. He's talking about technique, because that's how it works. And what you said about fear, a professional, sometimes the amateur will sort of think to himself, well, first I'll overcome fear, and then I'll do my work. Let me overcome fear. But the professional knows that you're never going to overcome fear. You just have to act in the face of fear. It's like that jumping into the pool. You just have to, what is the fear? Fear of failure, fear of success, whatever it is, you just have to sit down and do your work, whatever it is. Stevie Wonder gets up every morning, goes into the studio, sits down at the piano, and does his thing, no matter what. So that's another thing.
Well, one of the things that you actually write about in the book is that actors that you've spoken with, that asking them why they took difficult parts, is their response is because I was afraid of doing it,
right?
Or something along those lines.
Exactly, because they know that a part that scares them is a part that's going to make them stretch, and that's what they need to do. That's what their soul needs to do.
And the reason I wanted to kind of highlight this part for our listeners is to basically let them know that with what you're saying, the indication is if you have things out there that you're afraid of, that are difficult for you, you might want to take a second look at that and really look at your intuition, maybe giving you a message that this is the direction you might want to be going.
Yeah, in fact, Joe, let me interrupt you for a second, because this is very important. I think that when a lot of times people will think, I'm so afraid of this kind of a thing, and that makes them feel bad. I say the exact opposite. Fear is really a positive thing. And if you really are afraid of something, people ask themselves, am I a real writer? Am I a real artist? Am I a real dancer? Whatever it is. If you're afraid, then chances are you are a real writer. If you weren't afraid, it's like the phony writer, the phony dancer, the phony playwright is wildly confident. It's the real one who's scared to death. So if you're scared to death of something, that's a very good sign. It shows that you're the real deal and that you really care about it. And it also, like I said before, will kind of point you in the direction of what you have to do. Whatever it is you're most afraid of, that's the thing you have to do.
Yeah, I think that's such a great distinction too. I really think it's such a great distinction. It's kind of one of the ways that I look at anger, where some people, you don't want to get angry. I believe anger, and again, this could be getting into semantics. I think anger is a normal, positive thing. When it manifests itself into rage, then it's something that was never expressed. Because you can say, I am just angry and fed up with this situation. I know in my life, one of the things that kind of catapulted me into a higher level was I was just sick and tired of my lot in life. I wasn't happy with the way things were going. I was pissed off about it. I was angry. Now, if I would have never done anything about it, I probably would have got to the point where I was enraged, and then I not only would have become massively destructive to myself, I would have become massively destructive to other people. And so I think the same thing applies to what it is that you're saying. If people don't act on what I think life is putting out there as messages to us, the intuition, it can manifest itself into that energy, that creative energy that is so powerful if directed in the right way. It could manifest itself in all kinds of horrendous things, which you talk about in your book, from addictions to just people consuming drugs to all the negative behaviors in slow suicides,
Yeah.
to quick suicides, to real suicide.
If you don't act out your calling in a positive direction, it's not that it goes away. It becomes a negative thing. And people will develop diseases, they'll develop conditions, they'll develop neurotic, crazy, characteristics about themselves. And it's amazing how creative those conditions and those neurotic conditions can become, because they're actually turning their creativity, in an involuted way. They're inverting it in a negative way, and they'll create cultures and families that are absolutely crazy, and yet they're tremendously creative in a way, because they're not facing what they should do. Now, I want to talk about this just for a second here, which is, well, what is a calling? Where does this come from? Do we really have a calling? Do we really have a destiny? And I really believe that we do. I think we all do, no matter what it is. Everybody's got something that they're just great at. And the Greeks had a word for it. It was the word daimon, D-A-I-M-O-N. And in Latin, that word was genius. Your genius network. And what a genius was, what genius meant in Latin, it was a guardian spirit, or a kind of a guiding spirit that entered with our soul at birth, and that kind of called us in a certain direction. And everybody has that sort of guiding genius. Caesar's genius was to be a general and a politician. Alexander the Great had a certain other genius. Socrates had another kind of a genius. Florence Nightingale had her kind of a genius. So we all, I believe, have this. And I would bet you anything that our listeners, as they're listening right now, everybody hears it in their own head. They know what it is. We don't have to tell them. We don't have to put them on any kind of a test to see what it is. Everybody, you know in your own heart what it is that you're sort of called to do. Build a stock car, build a dragster, build a chopper, a Harley chopper. Some sort of thing is calling that and facing it saves a lot of heartache and a lot of disease.
Absolutely. I mean, just having you bring that up, and if and to all the listeners, and usually I don't have my listeners do exercises or say stop and breathe or do anything like that. It's just if you really just think about what it is that you said, and just not think about it, feel it, and really just give yourself even a couple of seconds to acknowledge that it's there. I think everyone can come to a place where they absolutely know that there is some light, there is some compass.
Let me jump in here, Joe, and I'll tell you a really good way to do this too, or what's also is in the book. My next door neighbor a few years ago used to be Tom Laughlin, if you remember Billy Jack. And Tom Laughlin's a very interesting guy. In addition to being an actor and a producer, he is a Jungian therapist, and he specializes in dealing with patients who have cancer, particularly terminal cancer. And one of the things that Tom Laughlin talks about is that moment when you're sitting in the doctor's office and he comes back with the x-rays and he says, you have cancer, is like a crucial, that's a life-changing moment. And people, in that moment, what happens, according to Tom Laughlin, is all of a sudden you realize what's real and what isn't real, what's important and what isn't important. And in that moment, you may say to yourself, man, it isn't really that important that I go to that meeting, that business meeting in Cincinnati. Maybe I should I should go to the Little League game with my son, or maybe I should, you get what I'm talking about.
Right.
You realize suddenly what is important. And sometimes people say to themselves, I played the violin when I was a kid, and I stopped. My dad told me I would never make any money at it, and I stopped. I gave it up. And in that moment, they may say to themselves, oh, how I wish I had stayed with the violin, or something like that. Or, oh, how I wish I had gone to Calcutta and worked with Mother Teresa, or something like that. So that's kind of a moment when everything becomes clear. And one of the things that Tom Laughlin does with his work with these patients is he encourages them to do that thing that they didn't do before. In other words, to live out their unlived life. Even at this late stage of the game, cancers go into remission. So I'm not saying this is true, but it may be that, who knows, that these diseases and malignancies don't come in some strange way from not living out the life that we were meant to live. That it becomes, again, it sort of feeds back on itself in a negative way. And that if you do start to live out that thing, that some of these conditions will go away.
I mean, I certainly am no doctor and have no scientific proof of the mind's ability to do that, although I don't think it's the mind. I think this is way deeper than the mind, which is a whole other subject, which if you're able to put into words, I'm more than happy to hear your insights on that, because I personally believe that, there's a force that's out there, call it, i.e. God, higher power, whatever someone wants to think of it as. And I think when you basically take your God-given talents and your desires and you direct them, that's where healing comes from. That's where real evolution comes from.
Well, one of the things, to follow up a little bit on Tom Laughlin and his Jungian background, when you speak about a higher power, and we're getting into the deep stuff now, and I believe in that too, completely. And I think that that cancer moment in the doctor's office, now what Tom Laughlin says, well, let me back up just a second. In Jungian psychology, which is Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist who was sort of a contemporary of Freud and broke off from Freud. Freud was big on infantile sexuality and discovery of the unconscious, and Jung's real breakthrough was the discovery of the collective unconscious and the archetypes of the unconscious. The things that you read in Joseph Campbell about myths and stuff like that in our unconscious are the various archetypes, like the king, the prince, the lover, the wanderer, the old woman, the wise old man, Merlin, that kind of thing. And in Jungian psychology, there is the ego, which he defined as that part of our psyche that handles day-to-day rational reality. And the ego is part of a much greater entity called the self, with a capital S. And the self contains the collective unconscious, all the collective memories of the race, for millions of years, and all the deep stuff comes from the self. Dreams come from the self. Intuitions come from the self, according to Jung, which was connected in his mind to the divine ground or God, whatever you want to call it, the deepest mystery. And so in that moment in the doctor's office, when suddenly we know what's real and what isn't real, according to what Tom Laughlin says, what has happened then is a paradigm shift has happened, and the seat of our identity has moved from our ego to our self. In other words, from our sort of little self, our little everyday rational self, to the deeper parts of ourself. And when we see the world from the deep part of ourselves, it's a completely different point of view. Now, from that, what is resistance? Where does resistance fit into this? In my view, and this is just my theory, I'm just a guy from the trenches, trying to figure it out. Resistance is the ego. Resistance comes from the ego. And when we move to the self, for instance, when we move to the self, if we're a born writer, we move to the self when we sit down and start to write. Or if we're a painter, it's when we get down in front of the canvas and we start to paint. And when that starts to happen, we've moved to the self, the ego is threatened, because the ego is about to get put out of business. And so the ego kind of rises up and produces these bogus rationalizations that are resistance. It's trying to defend itself and trying to keep us from growing into who we were meant to be, to keep us from being in touch with our deeper, more profound, more honorable, nobler nature. And to continue that for a minute, what makes it particularly insidious in the 21st century and in America is that we live in a completely commercialized, materialistic society that runs on consumerism, and that all of the messages that we get through advertising, MTV, movies, magazines, whatever, is all pushing us to our lower nature and not to our nobler nature. It's all pushing us to our more superficial nature. Buy more, consume more, be this way, look this way. And so it's all on the side of the ego. And so society is against us moving into the self, which is why it's so hard to do, because, or it certainly works against us, because we're constantly being reinforced by the popular culture to stay superficial, to stay shallow, to stay, selfish, and to stay self-centered. And there really is no support out there in the world, or very little. That's why you need a support group. You need a kind of a brainstorming team to support you in a decision to identify with the self and to work from your nobler side of your nature and the higher side of your nature.
So, Steve, is there positive sides of resistance?
That's a very good question. Yes, every force in nature, there's an equal and opposite reaction, and this is where it gets a little airy-fairy here.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let me say this.
Okay.
Most of my clients, most of my friends, most of my listeners that know me know that I would not be, taken in by some really silly little fortune cookie philosophy nonsense. I mean, so to understand the context of what I imagine you're going to talk about, they can, for further exploration, they can go ahead and read the book. But please talk about anything that you would like, even if you think it's a little out there, because I believe when someone expands upon the wisdom that you're sharing today by reading your book, that it will totally make sense.
Okay. I mean, what I've discovered in my own life is that once you sit down, I'm a believer in the Muse. Now, the Muse, there were 9 sisters, the Muses in Greek mythology, and they were the sisters who supported the arts. Each one covered a different art, and you've heard of the story of the Muse whispering in the ear of the artist. The Muses were the daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Mnemosyne means memory, kind of an interesting thing. And when I sit down to write in the morning, a friend of mine gave me a copy of the Invocation of the Muse from T.E. Lawrence's translation of the Odyssey, my great old friend Paul Rink. And he used to read it to him out loud every morning, kind of a prayer, invoking the Muse. And I do the same thing. And it's an asking for help from the divinity, and a sort of a self-effacement, a self-abnegation, and saying, as an artist, I'm just here to kind of serve the Muse. I'm here to let things come through me.
Do you mind sharing it?
In a way, I won't do that. It's in the book. I just would feel a little bit embarrassed about that. In a way, it's kind of too sacred to sort of do that. But it's in the book.
Perfectly fine.
And now I'm going to read something else to you, though. This is that. What I was going to say was that when we sit down, this is what I believe, every day at the typewriter or wherever it is, the Muse is watching us from another dimension. And the first day, she's a little bit impressed. Second day, that's pretty good. Finally, if we're there for a number of days, she says, all right, maybe I better give this guy an idea. And the Muse likes it when she sees us sitting down, and she will start to help us. And ideas will start to come. You say, now this sounds airy-fairy, but it isn't, because ideas will come to us in the shower. They'll come to us when we're just in a kind of a twilight state, waking up, when we're taking a walk, when we're driving on the freeway. Where do these ideas come from? You tell me. Right. I don't know. People can say, they come from the deeper self. I like to think they come from the Muse. They come from some mysterious source. And the more we start to work, and I can testify this for sure, when you get into a groove and you're working every day, the ideas start coming faster and faster. It's like a magnetized rod will attract iron filings. They just kind of keep coming. There's a self-organizing principle in the universe, and it works when we, as artists too, we just keep doing it every day, things start to get organized. Now, another thing, I'm going to read something here. It's from W.H. Murray, the Scottish Himalayan Expedition. It's about the magic of making a start, of just starting something. And I know as an entrepreneur, you know that this is reality. And there's also a quote from the great German writer Goethe in here at the end. He says, all sorts of things occur to help you that would otherwise not have occurred once you make a start. I'm quoting now. A whole stream of events issues from the decision, raising in one's favor all manner of unforeseen incidents and meetings and material assistance which no man could have dreamed would have come his way. I have learned a deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Now, this is a quote. Whatever you can do or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, magic, and power in it. Begin it now. And so I'm definitely a believer that just the act of starting produces some sort of alchemical reaction in the universe, and forces come to your aid.
And I agree with you. And I believe I am more aware of that at this point in my life than I probably ever have been. And all I can do is speak for myself and say that by being open to that things actually do come my way. And there's also something that you do mention in your book about when you are getting close to the finish line, when you are getting close to, the venture, the success, that the resistance part, the enemy, will actually really start just pushing on the throttle and doing everything possible to say, we've got someone that's going to shoot off like a rocket here. We better, claw our teeth into it. Or that's my own analogy, of course.
I couldn't agree more. It's true.
What is that? What? So for the listeners, what are in their quest of having their success, of reaching that higher plateau, whatever? What do they need to look out for?
You mean as they get close to the end of something?
Yes.
That's certainly something that I've found in my own experience, and I've read about that. Like when you get to the end of your dissertation, your PhD, all sorts of thoughts will come in your mind to make you stop. Should I jump into this other venture? Should I, go? My wife needs help in her thing. Let me help her, and that kind of thing. And so I think when you get to the end of something, you just have to be, again, just the knowledge that there is this thing out there, this resistance, helps tremendously. Because then when it rears its ugly head, you recognize it. Because it's always lying to you, and it's always trying to fool you. It's always coming with a false face and pretending to be your friend. And when you can sort of recognize it and see through it and say, I know what you're trying to do, then you just push through a little harder. You put the hammer down a little harder. You put the pedal to the metal. In the Odyssey, when Odysseus was right within sight of shore, just about getting back to Ithaca after 20 years of wandering, he had the bag of winds were on the deck. One of his guys opened it, and it blew him all the way back as far as he had traveled in those 20 years. So that's a sort of a mythic, expression of that same idea that close to the finish line, resistance really rears its ugly head. Back on the subject of positive of things. I'm a believer. The Kabbalah believes that above the Kabbalah is the Jewish mystic great document of Jewish mysticism, and it says that above every blade of grass is an angel saying, "Grow, grow," and I really liked that when I heard that. I thought that's great, and I think that we have these angels that are on our side too. And once we make a start into something, these invisible forces come to our aid in mysterious ways. Just like this quote said, even to the form of somebody will appear in our lives that'll have money for us, or somebody will appear with a well-paying gig, a 2-day gig that will just get us over the hump. Positive things start happening once we're truly committed and we're really going for it. There's a quote that I have in here from William Blake, the famous visionary poet, and it says, "Eternity is in love with the creations of time." And that's kind of a deep thing. You sort of have to think about that a little bit. And do you want me to see if I can interpret this? Or
Absolutely.
Or give you this whole thing?
It'd be better than me interpreting it.
Okay, he says, eternity is in love with the creations of time. Now, what does eternity mean in this case? In my opinion, it's another dimension. We live in a time-bound dimension. Here on this plane, we have time. But eternity doesn't have time. It's eternal. But yet, according to Blake, eternity is in love with the creations of time. Now, what I take that to mean is that there's another higher dimension. It's whether you call it a divine dimension, a dimension of heightened consciousness. If there are muses, they exist on this dimension. And if they're in love with the creations of time, what I believe that to mean is that they want, when Beethoven sits down at the piano, they want him to do the Sixth Symphony. These higher creatures, angels, muses, whatever you want to say. somehow they want to bring that into existence in our material, time-bound dimension. And that's the help that we get, I believe, from these muses. In a way, I think that every work of art, every entrepreneur's idea, everything that's creative, in my opinion, already exists in some other dimension, some non-material dimension. But the beings or the intelligence or whatever it is that's in that dimension, for some reason, wants it to be brought into existence in our dimension. We want to hear that da-da-da-dum, you know. We want Beethoven to do that thing. We want Bob Dylan to do another album. We want Joe Polish to come up with a new marketing idea that's going to revolutionize an industry or something like that. In a way, that's sort of co-creating the universe with God, as I've heard people say. So that when we make a start and when we keep going, these mysterious allies come to our aid, and they really will help it. I say in the book, and this is really true, that like I will finish a day's work, and I'll go take a hike up in the hills behind my house, and I'm walking for a half hour or so, and suddenly this kind of voice will come in to me, and he'll say, you know, that one word in that paragraph that you wrote, it shouldn't be ogle, it should be leer. You know, and it'll be right, this voice. And I'll say, well, where the hell does that come from? You know, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. There is this sort of self-correcting, self-editing, self-organizing, positive thing, our subconscious, whatever you want to call it, and it's working. It's working 24 hours a day for us, and it presents these answers to us, and it makes things better. And so if I believe in anything, I believe in that, because I've seen it work too many times. It's not like it's some airy-fairy thing. It's real, even if it's immaterial.
Well, I listen to my gut, and this is the best way that I can explain it.
That's a great way of saying it.
Now more than I ever did before. And it is amazing just what messages are out there if you pay attention to them. And what I believe there's guidance, and there's all kinds of assistance coming to our aid all the time if we're aware of it. And people have 10 bazillion different ways of interpreting that. You know, for me, it's just I really much pay attention to my intuition. I mean, when I read your book, I knew that for my own betterment, I actually wanted to do an interview with you, not just to create some sort of interesting, great interview.
I'm glad you did, Joe, because it's a lot of fun for me to do this too.
Yeah, and I think we've had some very interesting conversations today, and I absolutely felt that one of the best things that I could do to help my listeners is to share this with them. There's always going to be a certain amount that won't get any of this. It's going to be like, whatever, I don't agree with what they're saying, and this is
That's fine. Everybody's entitled to see it their own way.
Absolutely. And at this point, but I know the large majority are going to absolutely find this to be inspiring, to find it to be beneficial, to find it to be, you know, hopefully life-changing in a lot of ways. I'd like to read something before we get to the end of this interview that... and this, it'll take me a couple minutes to read this, but I think it is profound, and I think it's definitely something that I would like all my listeners to think about. And it kind of relates what you've mentioned a little bit. It says, "Have you heard this story?" This starts on page. Well, it's part of the Unlived Life, the chapter, The Unlived Life, and it says, "Have you heard this story? Woman learns she has cancer. 6 months to live. Within days, she quits her job, resumes the dream of writing Tex-Mex songs she gave up to raise a family, or starts studying classical Greek, or moves to the inner city and devotes herself to tending babies with AIDS. Woman's friends think she's crazy. She herself has never been happier. There's a postscript. Woman's cancer goes into remission. Is that what it takes? Do we have to stare death in the face to make us stand up and confront resistance? Does resistance have to cripple and disfigure our lives before we wake up to its existence? How many of us have become drunks and drug addicts, developed tumors and neurosis, succumb to painkillers, gossip, and compulsive cell phone use simply because we don't do the thing that our hearts, our inner genius is calling us to? Resistance defeats us. If tomorrow morning, by some stroke of magic, every dazed and benighted soul woke up with the power to take the first step towards pursuing his or her dreams, every shrink in the directory would be out of business,
prisons would stand empty, the alcohol and tobacco industries would collapse, along with the junk food, cosmetic surgery, and infotainment businesses, not to mention pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, and the medical profession from top to bottom. Domestic abuse would become extinct, as would addiction, obesity, migraine headaches, road rage, and dandruff. Look in your own heart. Unless I'm crazy, right now a still small voice is piping up, telling you as it has 10,000 times, the calling that is yours and yours alone. You know it, no one has to tell you. And unless I'm crazy, you're no closer to taking action on it than you were yesterday or will be tomorrow. You think resistance isn't real? Resistance will bury you. You know, Hitler wanted to be an artist. At 18, he took his inheritance, 700 kronen, and moved to Vienna to live and study. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts and later to the School of Architect. Ever seen one of his paintings? Neither have I. Resistance beat him. Call it overstatement, but I will say it anyway. It was easier for Hitler to start World War II than it was for him to face a blank square of canvas. Now, I don't think you're crazy, and I think that's not an overstatement. And I think that applies to everybody's life, and I believe there's so much human suffering that could be obliterated if people stand up and face resistance day in, day out, and beat it and move to higher levels in their life. And that's certainly my hope for all our listeners. Silly question I'd like to ask you. If War of Art were to become a screenplay, who would you cast as Resistance?
I don't know. Maybe I don't know about that. But like I said before, after Adaptation, that movie with Nicolas Cage, nobody could ever do any movie about a writer because that said everything there is to say.
Right.
The one thing I would like to add is that we're talking about resistance, we're talking about the positive forces and all this kind of thing. The bottom line here is there is no easy answer. There's no magic bullet. There's no royal highway. The answer is you just have to sit down and do it. Yeah, that's all there is to it. There's no one else can help you. Your spouse can't help you. Your kids can't help you. Your guru can't help you. Nobody can help you. You alone know what it is that you have to do. You alone have to face your fears. And so there's, like I said, there's no way to do anything about it except to do it.
Right. And
that's the bottom line. And all I can say is that, in my experience, there are some sunlit uplands there. You know, if you persevere, it starts to pay off very soon. It's like going to the gym or training for the marathon or something like that. It's hard in the beginning, but once you start going, it becomes kind of self-reinforcing, and it gets a little bit easier each time.
Well, I say all the time, it's a lot easier to maintain momentum than it is to create it. And certainly, once you have the momentum created, one thing you said your friends won't help you, your family won't help you, no one can help you, and I agree. No one will help you or do anything until you start helping yourself. And once you start doing that and fighting that, then those forces come in and they back you up. However, it doesn't come, it's the whole saying of you don't stand in front of the fire without putting in any logs and expect to get some heat. You put the heat in first, and then it just builds upon itself. And I think life is the same way.
Well, Joe, at the risk of quoting, if you'll forgive me for quoting myself.
No, go ahead.
Let's wrap this up. I'm just going to read like the last paragraph of the book, the last two paragraphs of the book, which kind of wraps it up, I think. And it says, this is about I'll just read this whole thing. Are you a born writer? Were you put on earth to be a painter, a scientist, an apostle of peace? In the end, the question can only be answered by action. Do it or don't do it. It may help to think of it this way. If you were meant to cure cancer or write a symphony or crack cold fusion and you don't do it, you not only hurt yourself, even destroy yourself, you hurt your children, you hurt me, you hurt the planet. You shame the angels who watch over you, and you spite the Almighty who created you and only you with your unique gifts for the sole purpose of nudging the human race 1 millimeter farther along its path back to God. Creative work is not a selfish act or a bid for attention on the part of the actor. It's a gift to the world and every being in it. Don't cheat us of your contribution. Give us what you've got.
It's fabulous. Fabulous. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm going to hit you with another question. all your other books.
We were so close to the end.
And we were, yes, we were. And here I go. The other books that you have written, your most recent being The Virtues of War about Alexander the Great. Do you take some of the philosophies and beliefs that, and this is kind of a loaded question because I imagine you would say yes. What are other things that people can take out of your other books that have to relate to resistance, the characters and everything else in your other writings?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm not even sure I know what the answer is. Most of my other books are sort of warrior themed in a way. They're even The Legend of Bagger Vance, which is about golf, theoretically, really is a knockoff of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the Vedic scripture that's about, you know, a warrior's the principles of being a yogi or a man of discipline. So I think that in a lot of ways my other stories are parables of resistance, in the sense that they may be talking about physical enemies. The 300 Spartans at the pass of Thermopylae, when an army of 2 million Persians were coming, and the 300 Spartans and their allies had to hold the pass as long as they could to the last man, which they did. I mean, that's kind of inspiring to me, because I suppose it's an analogy to that same sort of thing. These hordes of negative enemies coming in, and the warriors digging down deep and holding the pass against them. So maybe that's it. But I'll leave that to other people, because, you know, a writer can never really comment on his own stuff. You know, it's not up to me. I just write it.
Yes, and I think I have found one of my newest favorite authors. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks for being the force behind it, and thanks for. I want to salute you for your Genius Network thing. I think it's a great thing. Is, you know, Joe, you sent me a bunch of tapes to sort of familiarize myself with this, and I think it's great that this information, you know, me, anybody else that's putting it out there, it helps. You know, we're all family. We're all in this together. We're all facing the same stuff. It's great to be able to share, you know, a little experience from the trenches, and maybe it'll help somebody just a little bit. And I know I've been helped by your stuff, and I hope this helps somebody. Yeah,
absolutely. This has helped me, and that's the same reason I wanted to share it with my listeners. And so I would just ask my listeners to, this is certainly not my typical interview. It's usually on, you know, how to market, business building, and things like this. And I think your book is so much more about all areas of life. And so I would sincerely ask my listeners to read the book. If you have not gotten it yet, please get it, read it. I think it will be just one of the best things you've ever done for yourself. I felt the book was so useful that I've shared it with many of my friends and clients, and will continue to do so. And I'd like to get all my listeners' feedback. You know how to contact me through geniusnetwork.com. And please give us your insights. Any sort of comments that I get on this interview, I will certainly get them to Stephen. And you can find more about Stephen at StephenPressfield.com, StephenPressfield.com. All of your books are available at Amazon and Barnes & Nobles and every bookstore. And that's it. So thank you, Stephen, so much. And to all my listeners, thank you for listening to this, and have yourself a wonderful day.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Awesome.
Hello, this is Joe Polish. I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this interview. I hope you found it very useful. Please give me your feedback on all of the interviews that you listen to. I'd love to hear your feedback, so we can always deliver a great program for you. Our website is www.joepolish.com. And we also have a Joe Polish Recommends section, so you can take a lot of the ideas and concepts that you hear on my Genius Network interview series and apply them to your business and find vendors and resources. You can go to joepolish.com to find that information and click on the Joe Polish Recommends section. And also, if you would like to find out about more interviews and invest in more useful Genius Network series interviews, go to www.geniusnetwork.com. Thanks, and eat your competition alive.